want to emphasize the fact that I have never been either a Democrat or Republican. In fact, until I was fired from the FBI, I didn't even know who Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky was. I had never dealt with her office. I have never known her. I have never met her. I got to hear her voice a lot, but I never had anything to do with this woman. So it was not like right now, it is not as if right now I'm talking about someone that I have some sort of a vendetta or beef against. And that is true with every single individual and pictures you see on this State Secrets Privilege Gallery. It has been 16 years since my whistleblowing journey began with the FBI. So bear with me and hopefully we can make this short and sweet. I worked for the FBI in 2001, right after 9/11. I worked for several departments for the FBI's Washington field office. This is in Washington, D.C. I worked for 3 different departments, to be exact. I worked for counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and also I did some work for the criminal division. There are various divisions within the FBI. And even though I started as a language specialist with the FBI, I speak 4 languages, including Farsi and Turkish and Azerbaijani. Fairly quickly, within 2 months after I started, they asked me, and these are the special agents that I worked with. Some of them were in Washington, D.C. field office. Some of them were in other field offices, such as Chicago and Partisan office in New Jersey, LA office in California. Pretty soon, these agents asked me to perform not only translations for them, but also actual analysis. During this period, the special agent I worked with in Washington's field office, had contacted another agent, and this person was a special agent in charge in Chicago, FBI's Chicago field office, and had told him about me and the abilities I had from speed reading to analysis, and had asked him to consider using me for a very, very important investigative files that these 2 agents had previously jointly worked on. This agent, special agent in charge, in the Chicago's field office, his name was Joel Roberts. And the urgency for him to send these documents, these files to me, was that as it had happened before during the Clinton administration, with the Bush administration as well, the executive branch was trying to kill this investigation and shut it down. Therefore, they needed to gather more damning, conclusive evidence against the targets of their investigations. And their investigations involved both Americans, in this case officials, and foreign entities and foreign operatives. He had sent me via secure channels 7 random documents from one particular investigative file. He wanted me, and again, the date range for these documents gathered was from late 1998 until 2001. He asked me to very quickly, as fast as I could, to go through the material, including foreign language recordings, and give him a quick feedback and analysis on what I had found to be pertinent and why. Basically, it was his way of testing me and see if I were as good as the agent I worked with had bragged about. I went through these random files, individual files, including audio files, and including audio files that were in other languages. And immediately I started typing up my report on very pertinent information that I was listening to. So I explained all that, and the agent chuckled, the agent in Chicago. So that's very good. However, I'll have to tell you, this person that you're talking about is not named John, it's Jan. See, because in various languages that I speak, those languages are gender neutral. So we don't have his or her or she or he. There is either a name or it is something like it. Okay, so for me, all I heard was, and this was by accented individual, John. So I assumed this congressional person was a man named John. Well, it was because of their accent. They were talking about a congresswoman in Washington, D.C., and her name was Jan, short for Janice. He had caught me off guard because I said, well, that's interesting because the hooking up process, they are using this woman, and this is her name, and this is her nationality. I was puzzled for a second. And then I was told that, yes, this person, Jan, was married, but it was a fake marriage. It was not a real marriage. And in fact, she was a closet lesbian. And these foreign entities, this was not the first time. They had in the past used female baits to hook her, including certain people who worked in her office before she came to Washington, D.C. Anyhow, obviously I had passed the test because the next morning when I reported back to work, I came back to my office. I saw that the special agent in charge from Chicago had sent me what he referred to the motherlode file. This file went dated from 1998 till 2002, and it contained over 5,000 documents. Now, some of these documents were audio in nature, and each one could be anywhere in terms of length from 200 minutes to as short as 1 minute. And looking at this file and the size of it, I kind of panicked and I said, this is a huge file, and I have other assignments because I'm working on counterterrorism cases. I'm working on the cases that are directly related to Washington, D.C. office. And the special agent in charge said, no worries. This is the most important case right now you're working because it involves Chicago. It involves several officials. And they, and by they, he meant the White House. And at the time, it was the Bush administration. They are going to shut down this investigation and stop us from monitoring these people, these criminals, in the next 2-3 months. So I'm going to talk with your superiors, and I want to make sure you're given enough time to work on this case. So I began working on this case furiously, and I started discovering some amazing espionage-related activities, criminal-related activities, not only by this particular target, but other U.S. officials, and not only U.S. officials, but also this congresswoman's husband. Once I published my state secrets privilege list in late 2007, I did not think about Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky that much. But that came to an end. In 2009, I was officially deposed by a party who was involved in a court case. The party in this case was Krikorian, and the person who was in this legal lawsuit against him was Congresswoman Jane Schmidt. At least I remember her last name being Schmidt. But for this case, the candidate who was running against Congresswoman Schmidt deposed me. So I had a court order, and I was obligated to go and provide my testimony under oath. Initially, the FBI and the Justice Department tried to block my testimony. They wrote and they sent this letter, this order that came in the form of letters saying that she's not allowed to testify. However, my attorney said, you can't do that under the laws, under the Constitution. All you can do is, and this is the FBI and the Justice Department, you can be present during her testimony, and you can raise your hand and object and say, no, we are not going to let her answer this question. I challenged all that, and I went under oath, and I provided my 3+ hours testimony for the court case in Krikorian versus Schmidt case. During my testimony, the other party, Congresswoman Schmidt's party, was represented by the infamous and famous Bruce Fein. So between Bruce Fein and the attorney for Krikorian, I was being asked many questions, and some of those questions ended up coming to Chicago. Being under oath, not having the FBI or Justice Department people present there to stop me, and knowing that I was not going to divulge any information that was legitimately classified, I answered every question truthfully. And that included the questions that had to do with Chicago.
We've talked about some members of Congress having connections with Turkish government or Turkish organizations. Are there others that you're aware of other than the ones we've discussed already?
Congressional members?
Congressional members?
Yes. There's an individual with a question mark there. The reason it's a question mark is I was terminated by April 2002, but this particular congresswoman, these Turkish organizations and operatives, if they can't do it via money, they do via blackmail. So they collect information on sexual lives and other information like that. Mm-hmm. And with this particular congresswoman, between 2000 and until I left, this congresswoman is married with children, grown children, but she is bisexual. So they had sent Turkish female agents, and that Turkish female agent worked for Turkish government, and had sexual relationship with this congresswoman in her townhouse actually in this area, and the entire episodes of their sexual conduct was being filmed because the entire house, this congressional woman's house, was bugged, and so they had all that documented to be used for certain things that they wanted to request, but I left, so I don't know whether that congresswoman complied and gave. That's why I couldn't use her name, because her face, because I don't know if she did anything illegal afterwards. But information was being collected for blackmail purposes and her lesbian relationship, and the Turkish entities wanted both congressional related favoritism from her, but also her husband was in a high position in the area, in the state she was elected from, and these Turkish entities ran certain illegal operations, and they wanted her husband's help. But I don't know if she provided them with those. I left. I was terminated.
And during this testimony, this recorded, both videotape and audio, I provided my testimony on a congresswoman who was engaged in espionage activities, who was engaged with her husband in nefarious criminal-related activities, and who was a closet lesbian, who was being blackmailed or being recorded by various entities, including foreign entities, for blackmail purposes and for espionage activities-related purposes. But even then, based on the fact that I had not gone through the entire 5,000 documents, I did not name the congresswoman during this testimony. I talked about Chicago. I talked about her husband being prominent. I talked about her sexual orientation and how it was being used by people who had nefarious purposes. But thanks to some independent activists and investigative journalists, not with any of the US mainstream media or so-called alternative media, within a couple of days, her name was leaked. They found out, well, how many congresswomen do you have from Chicago with a politically prominent convicted husband? Bob Creamer is a criminal who was convicted and jailed for almost $3 million embezzlement cases. And he is a name that has been present and very prominent within Chicago and actually Illinois politics. In fact, Bob Creamer was the handler, the campaign manager, the consultant, the top advisor of all the criminal Chicago, Illinois political figures who ended up either in jail or they were exposed for their criminal operations. Jan Tchaikovsky's husband was not only a thief who embezzled the public close to $3 million, but he's also the man who worked with criminals such as Mayor Daley of Chicago, such as Governor Blagojevich, such as Tony Rasko. In fact, it was Bob Creamer, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky's husband, who groomed and trained Rahm Emanuel, who ended up being President Obama's chief of staff when he got elected. And not a single media outlet, mainstream media outlet, covered this case. I have to give the credit where it's due. The only publications that printed this and publicized this one of them was the American Conservative Magazine, and they did a very courageous job of putting a lengthy, comprehensive article. In fact, it became a cover story. I was on the cover page. I believe it was titled "Who's Afraid of Sibel Edmonds," where I talked about and I confirmed that yes, in this particular Congresswoman case, this was Jan Schakowsky, and her husband, Bob Creamer, is also not only the fact that he was convicted of this embezzlement, he was involved in mafia-related activities that involve narcotics, money laundering, and in some cases, espionage. And the other one was an independent site ran by an activist called Brad Friedman, Brad Blog. Brad Blog, again, I'm always thankful for the fact that he sent the cameraman there. He published my deposition in full, which was 3 hours worth of videotape. And then he went and he sought comments from Jan Schakowsky's office, which her office denied. But at the time, after they issued this non-denial denial and attacked my credibility, I stepped out and made a public call. I put an official letter that was delivered. It was a certified letter, and I also had it published on my site, and I gave it to any media outlets who wanted to have it. And basically, in my letter, I invited the Congresswoman to join me in a congressional hearing under oath, where I would testify, name the dates, name the names, name the files, offices, everything on all her deeds, including the interns that she put in office who were actually spying for foreign governments, that I would be willing to do that under oath if she would join me and take a stand under oath and challenge and deny it under oath. She refused. She said she would never do that. When this information went out on Jan Schakowsky, when I stood there and I told the truth, when I confirmed to the media once her name was leaked, I have to say I received the worst, the most vicious attacks from the so-called left activists, the liberals, the Democrats. I have never been called the names I had been called. The outlets that were bashing me and calling me the names that I don't even know how the internet even allows that language to be published included despicable sites like Daily Kos, Democratic Underground. Democracy Now! Pledged that they would never ever invite me on. In fact, I was called the B word, bitch. People who became famous after working for Democracy Now!, such as Jeremy Scahill, they went onto the social media and called me traitor, repug, someone who doesn't know what she's talking about. Now, interestingly, bear with me, these same people, Democracy Now!'s Israeli Amy Goodman, Jeremy Scahill, all of them, Daily Kos, when I initially my name became public in 2002, 2003, during the Bush administration, when I revealed the case of Dennis Hastert as a criminal official who had been under investigation since 1998. These people were my biggest cheerleaders out there. Go and look at the archives for Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, okay? You will see that I had been on her show at least 3 or 4 times. You would see these threads. I would ask people to go and look into Daily Kos or Democratic Underground and all these liberal websites and the Salon and whatnot. And you will see articles, a courageous whistleblower, and everything that she's standing against has to do with the Republicans. And because she's being gagged by the Republicans, let's throw our weight and be her cheerleaders, because we can go ahead and give this finger to the Republicans. That was the only reason. They were not cheering for me because of all the things that I was. It was just a matter of partisanship. Well, I didn't receive the same thing after 2008 when Obama came to office. And when I was putting out all these names, and some of them were Democrats, I didn't receive before that from the Republican side. So it's to me, it's a significant point that is worth emphasizing here, and to see which side is more inflicted with the disease of rabies, which one is actually more violent, and which one controls the media most. And I have to be frank here. You can go and look at their archives from 2008 after Obama got elected. You will never see me or my name being mentioned by Daily Kos, Democratic Undergrounds, Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, PBS, NBC. At that point, I was equal evil. They didn't have anything, they didn't want to have anything to do with me. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. They just wanted to bash. That was all it was about for them, partisanship. So I'm going to go back again and emphasize not only this woman, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, but also her husband. I already listed the names of criminals he served. Now, interestingly, just a few months back, this expose came out showing this convicted criminal, this man who's the major figure within Chicago Mafia. This is the man who was jailed. This is the man who worked with all the criminal politicians who were either jailed or kicked out of office. The same Bob Creamer had visited Obama's White House 342 times, many of them for secret meetings. This basically is a meeting every week. In fact, when the list of White House visitors was leaked, there is no one on that list that comes close to this man's when it comes to visitation number. And to this date, White House has refused to provide the media with the reason this man was showing up in the White House, some of them for secret meetings. They just refused answering that question. This is the Bob Creamer we are talking about. But this same woman, this same Jan Schakowsky and her husband as well, have been grooming and working with terrorist mullah, the fanatic mullah Fethullah Gulen. Just take a look at the list of all the events that she's the speaker of, she's the sponsor of, the letters she has written praising Fethullah Gulen, his charter schools, Fethullah Gulen's financial headquarters is in Chicago, it's in Illinois. And it has been involved with many operations, including money laundering, narcotics, which we have already listed in the past through Newsbud and before that Boiling Frogs Post. But this woman, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, as you will see, and her husband, along with AIPAC and JINSA, have been the biggest supporters and part of the network of this terrorist mullah Fethullah Gulen. You don't have to have access to all those 5,000 documents. There is so much that can be dug up and exposed on this duo. All it takes is the will and the desire to expose the truth, to let the Americans know. Just the connection between this woman and her husband and Fethullah Gulen. It's very interesting. You also are going to see this. As I have always repeatedly said, Chicago, the state of Illinois, has been the center, whether it's money laundering or narcotics, and for the Operation Gladio B. Look at where Fethullah Gulen, this terrorist mullah, has based most of his operations. The arteries of this mullah's operation is in Chicago, is in Illinois. And guess who else is a big supporter of this mullah and his network? Recently, I came across a picture of Rahm Emanuel, the man who is connected to the same mob and mafia as Jan Tchaikovsky and Bob Kramer and Governor Blagojevich and Mayor Daley and Tony Rasko. This same man, here is his picture. He has been working and supporting the same terrorist mullah network. You see this picture here? That is Rahm Emanuel from Chicago. Obama from Chicago. Tchaikovsky from Chicago. Dennis Hastert from Chicago. Do you need more?